On July 12th this year, an Air India Boeing 787 took off from India, heading to the UK. Just minutes after takeoff, the plane suddenly dropped out of the sky and crashed. All 270 people on board died in the accident. Exactly 1 month later, again on July 12th, India released a preliminary investigation report on the crash. As soon as the report came out, it drew major attention from both the global aviation industry and the media. People found the whole thing hard to believe. So what made it so unbelievable? The cockpit voice recorder and the black box showed that the plane was in its initial climb only a few seconds into the flight, around 10 to 15 seconds after takeoff. It had just reached a climbing speed of about 180 knots, and at that very moment, both engines, left and right, shut down at the same time. The engines simply lost power because the fuel supply was suddenly cut off. In the cockpit recording, you can hear the captain asking the co-pilot, "Why did you cut off the fuel supply? Why did you shut down the engines?" And the co-pilot replied, "I didn't do anything." Then, strangely, the fuel flow resumed on its own. But by then, it was too late. Because the plane was still so close to the ground, the engines didn't have enough time to fully restart and power the aircraft. There's a short delay when restarting jet engines, and during that gap, the plane lost lift, stalled, and crashed. What makes this case even more puzzling is what the report found. The aircraft itself was in perfect working condition. There was no mechanical failure at all. Everything was functioning properly. And yet, both engines lost fuel at the same time, which is extremely unusual. Normally, to shut off fuel to even one engine, someone inside the cockpit has to manually flip a specific switch. And not just flip, it's designed with a safety lock. You have to lift the cover first, then push the switch forward to actually cut the fuel. Each engine has its own switch, and you have to do this twice if you want to shut down both engines. So for both switches to be flipped at nearly the same time, by accident, that's incredibly unlikely. One aviation expert compared the odds of this happening without human interference to the chance of an asteroid hitting the Earth. Because of all this, the crash is now widely suspected to have been caused by human actions, specifically intentional interference. Many now believe that someone in the cockpit may have deliberately shut off the fuel to both engines right after takeoff. Right now, all we have is a preliminary report. The full investigation might take another year or even 2. But even with just this early report, a lot of people are already shocked. They just can't understand how this crash happened. That said, I think India actually handled things pretty well. The airline, the aviation authority, and even the government, they didn't try to cover it up. Even though many people now suspect the pilot might have done it on purpose, they still made the key parts of the cockpit voice recording public within just a month. Now, if we look at how things were handled in China, it's a different story. The China Eastern Flight 321 crash happened 3 years ago, and up until now, we still haven't seen an official investigation report. But honestly, most people already have a pretty good idea of what happened. I made 2 episodes about the 321 crash. The info came from people in the aviation industry, and from what they told me, I've basically figured out what went on in that cockpit. What really happened is actually worse than what I shared in those shows, but I'm not going to get into that here. On May 22nd this year, a government reply started circulating online. Someone had requested that China's aviation authority release the 321 crash report. The response said, according to Chinese law, any information that could affect social stability or national security will not be made public. If you disagree, you can take legal action. So basically, they're saying, don't wait for the report. It's not coming. But if you think about it, that response already tells you something. When they say social stability and national security, it likely means they believe the pilot crashed the plane on purpose. They're worried that if the truth comes out, someone else might try to do the same thing. But let's be honest, even without the official report, most people already know what likely happened. In that way, the government's reply kind of confirms it. The crash of Flight 321 was caused by a pilot suicide. Now, why am I talking about these 2 crashes together? Because I want to make a point. Modern planes are extremely safe. Technically speaking, they're very reliable. But the truth is, most crashes today, more than 90%, are caused by humans. And the hardest type to prevent? When someone does it on purpose. If a pilot decides they don't want to live anymore, then honestly, no matter how advanced the plane is, it's almost impossible to stop a crash. This isn't just about Flight 321. There have been other similar cases in aviation history too. That's why I believe pilots are the most important part of flight safety. And sadly, this isn't just theory. On July 1st this year, there was another tragic incident at the Jilin branch of China Southern Airlines. A pilot named Li Yuzhong stabbed the head of the union and the head of the flight department. Then he broke through a window on the 14th floor of their office building and jumped to his death. After the news came out, I saw lots of comments online. People were saying things like, "At least he didn't crash a plane," or "Thank you for not taking anyone else with you." Some even called him merciful. Why? They said, "Look at this pilot. He knew exactly who he had a problem with. He didn't hurt passengers or random people. He went straight to the union leader at his own airline and stabbed him. Then he stabbed the head of the flight department. After that, he jumped to his death. Because he didn't take a whole plane of passengers with him, people called him righteous. Some even said this captain had a conscience." And honestly, I found those comments a bit heartbreaking. Why? Because becoming a captain at a major airline is not easy. It takes nearly 10 years from initial training to being a co-pilot to finally earning that captain's license. It takes hard work, discipline, and commitment. So I couldn't help but wonder, what drove someone like that to end his life? What was going on behind the scenes? And what does this say about the way airline management works in China today? That's what I want to talk about, the story behind this pilot. His name was Li Yuzhong. He was 31 years old. According to his wife, he had earned his captain certification just about a year ago. That's considered fast. In fact, becoming a captain at 31 in China means he was one of the more outstanding pilots in the system. He and his wife were what's known as a dual flying couple. She was a flight attendant, and he was a pilot. They had a 1-year-old child. By all appearances, they had a happy family, a bright future. So why would someone like that choose to die? To understand that, we have to go back to June 27th of this year. On that day, Captain Li was flying a scheduled flight when something happened, a level 2 incident. What exactly that incident was, Southern Airlines hasn't revealed. So I asked around. I talked to several pilots, and they all told me the same thing. A level 2 incident is extremely minor. Now don't confuse that with a class 2 event, which is serious. A class 2 event might be something like taking the wrong taxiway, or a hard landing with over 2 Gs of force, which could damage the landing gear. That's serious. But a level 2 incident? That's minor stuff. For example, if you're taxiing on the ground and go over 30 knots, that counts as level 2. Or if your heading during takeoff drifts more than 3 degrees, that's also level 2. Most airlines in China don't even bother discussing level 2 incidents in internal meetings. They usually only review level 3 incidents, more significant ones. That's when the team sits down, talks through what happened, and learns from it. Level 2 stuff usually doesn't even make it into those discussions. But for some reason, the Jilin branch of Southern Airlines treated this incident very seriously. They immediately began an internal process called a flight inspection. What does that mean? It means that while Li was flying his next flight, an inspector sat behind him the entire time, silently observing and taking notes. From the moment he boarded through the entire flight, everything he did was watched. Every mistake, every small irregularity was written down. That's a lot of pressure. And after just one flight, the inspector reported a long list of problems. First, Li didn't remember the cockpit door code. Modern cockpits have a passcode lock, and he got it wrong. Then there was a phone in the cockpit that still had a 5G signal. It wasn't switched off. That's another issue. He also wasn't very clear on the emergency communication procedures. And during takeoff and landing, they said his throttle and control stick movements were too loose. All in all, they reported around 10 different issues, and those were sent straight to management. So on June 30th, Li Yuzhong was called into the headquarters of China Southern Airlines Jilin branch. The union chairman informed him that he would be officially disciplined. What was the decision? They told him he would be demoted to what's called a Category Z captain, also known as a cruise captain. he'd have to fly 50 flight hours, complete 4 takeoffs and landings, and if there were no further issues, he could be reinstated as a full captain. On top of that, he'd need to go through another round of theoretical training before flying again as a cruise captain. Now, many people might not be familiar with these captain classifications. Early on, there were lots of rumours online saying he was demoted all the way to co-pilot. Even his wife seemed to think so, but I checked and that's not accurate. He was demoted to a cruise captain, not a co-pilot. So what is a cruise captain? In China, captains generally fall into 2 main categories: full captains or command captains and cruise captains. A full captain has the authority to make all flight decisions, especially during takeoff and landing. They're responsible for the entire flight. That's what we usually think of when we say the captain. A cruise captain, on the other hand, doesn't have that authority. On long-haul flights that last 8 to 10 hours, airlines usually assign 2 captains, one full captain and one cruise captain. The full captain handles all the critical phases: takeoff, landing, and emergencies. But during the cruise phase, when the plane is flying steadily and the autopilot is on, he might take a break, talk to the cabin crew, or go to the restroom. That's when the cruise captain steps in and takes over temporarily. But the cruise captain can't make independent decisions. If anything goes wrong, they have to wake up the full captain or hand over control. So in short, they have less responsibility and of course much lower pay. How much lower? Pilots told me the income gap between a full captain and a cruise captain can be 30% to 40%. That's a huge drop. Now, about those 50 flight hours. On paper, it sounds like something you could finish quickly, maybe in just a few days. But here's the catch. It depends on how your flights are scheduled. If the flight operations director assigns you full shifts, sure, you could finish in a week. But what if they barely give you hours? What if you only get 3 or 5 hours per week? Then it could take a month, maybe 2, just to get those 50 hours done. And in China, most pilots don't earn much in base salary. Their main income depends on flight hours. The fewer hours you fly, the less you get paid. For many, the monthly base salary might only be a few thousand yuan. They rely on flight time to make a living. So for Li Yuzhong, this demotion was probably unbearable. He got the notice on June 30th, and on July 1st, the very next day, he went to meet with the union chairman and the flight department director to appeal the decision. But honestly, I think he had already made up his mind. He came prepared. He brought a knife. He went into the meeting room at the Jilin branch office. There, he stabbed the union chairman. Then he stabbed the flight department director. After that, he ran out of the room, broke through the glass, and jumped from the building. And just like that, the tragedy happened. According to Li Yuzhong's wife, the incident happened around 9 a.m. on July 1st, the anniversary of the founding of the Communist Party. But she didn't get the call until around noon. When she rushed to the scene, no one told her that her husband had already died. Everyone kept silent. It wasn't until about 2 p.m. that someone finally told her the truth, that he was gone. She had just gotten married not long ago, and she couldn't accept it. Her mother-in-law was also there, and she said that people were trying to hold her back, physically stop her from rushing forward, and both of them got hurt in the chaos. So then the question is, why would Li Yuzhong go as far as taking his own life, just because of that disciplinary decision? Over the next few days, something started going around online. A so-called suicide note said to be written by Li Yuzhong. In that letter, it said things like, "Don't you all know about the Flight 321 crash? Every pilot in China, 60,000 of us, knows it was suicide. You treat us like we're not even human. You leave us no way out. You trap us in this system and then make us pay these crazy penalties if we try to leave. We're nothing more than slaves in uniforms." Now, I looked into it. That suicide note was likely fake. Why? Because it was dated June 22nd. But the flight incident that led to his punishment didn't even happen until June 27th, and he wasn't disciplined until June 30th. So it wouldn't make sense for him to have written a farewell letter a week before anything had even happened. Still, what was written in that letter struck a nerve. A lot of what it said reflects real problems. After Li's death, many pilots reached out to me. They said, "You don't know what it's like, Wang. From the outside, we might look polished and respected. But in reality, under China's current system, we're flying slaves." At first I thought, can it really be that bad? But the more I listened, the more I realized, yes, there are serious problems in China's flight training and management system. Let me explain a bit about how pilots are trained in China. There are 2 main paths. The first is called the Yangchengsheng program. These are students who go straight into flight school after high school. They apply to one of 3 specialized aviation colleges, like the Civil Aviation Flight University in Guanghan, Sichuan, and major in flight operations. The second path is called Dabigai, short for University Graduate Conversion. In this case, students graduate from a regular university first. Then, if an airline recruits them and they pass the health checks, the airline sends them to a flight school for training. So there are 2 different entry points, but both come with a big issue: cost. Flight training in China is incredibly expensive. Even though the regular tuition fees at aviation colleges are low, just a few thousand yuan per year, the actual cost of training a pilot is huge. On average, it costs around 700,000 to 800,000 yuan to train a single pilot. That's even more than in the US, where full training usually costs about 600,000 to 700,000 yuan. Why is training in China more expensive? Because airspace is tightly controlled. Flight schools can't just fly anytime they want. They need permission, and that drives up costs. Training time is limited, but demand is high. So where does the money come from? For students in the Yangchengsheng program, once they complete a semester or 2, the flight school will basically sell them to a domestic airline. Yes, that's the term many pilots use, sold. Let's say a student pilot gets sold to China Eastern, Air China, or OK Airways. These airlines pay the 700,000 or 800,000 yuan in training fees, and after graduation, the student goes straight to work for them. For university grads in the Dabigai program, the process is even simpler. Maybe Hainan Airlines hires you, pays for your training, and sends you to flight school for about a year and a half. After that, you go through something called aircraft conversion training, because the planes you flew during training aren't the same as commercial jets like the A321 or wide-body airliners. So at the airline, you're paired with a senior instructor captain. You keep practicing takeoffs and landings until you meet the required standard. Once you're done with that, you become a co-pilot. In China, co-pilots are ranked from F1 to F7. F1 and F2 are junior levels, and F3 to F7 are more experienced. As a co-pilot, you sit in the right seat while the captain sits in the left. Your job is to support the captain, helping with navigation, monitoring systems, and communicating with air traffic control. Most co-pilots need to build up more than 2,000 flying hours before they're even allowed to apply for a captain license. And becoming a captain in China is not easy. You have to pass theory exams, simulator tests, and interviews. Pilots say the simulator test in China is one of the hardest in the world. It's rare to pass on the first try. If you fail, you might have to wait another 3 months before applying again. But if you finally make it, you earn your captain qualification. After flying a bit more, you can be promoted to full command captain, which means you're now responsible for the entire flight and make all final decisions. Right now, there are about 30,000 full captains in China. The total number of commercial pilots is around 90,000. There are roughly 4,000 to 5,000 commercial aircraft in the country. That means, on average, there are 7 to 8 pilots for every plane. Some people have started saying there's an oversupply of pilots now, especially captains. So why is this happening? In the early days, China's airline industry was basically controlled by the big 3 state-owned carriers: Air China, China Eastern, and China Southern. But as the market opened up, private airlines began to appear, like OK Airways, Spring Airlines, and others. The problem was, these new airlines didn't have any trained pilots of their own, so they started recruiting from the state-owned airlines. And to get them, they offered better pay and conditions. Pilot turnover became common. The big 3 saw this and started to panic. They had invested years and millions in training these pilots, and now they were leaving. So in 2014, China's major airlines all agreed to put limits on pilot movement. They created a set of rules to control pilot flow. This agreement said 2 main things. First, if a pilot wants to leave one airline for another, the new airline has to pay a transfer fee to the old one, somewhere between 6 to 10 million yuan. The 2 companies negotiate that amount. Second, they set a hard limit. Only 1% of all pilots can legally change airlines each year. So if there are 30,000 captains in the country, only 300 can switch jobs per year. Eventually, airlines started racing to develop their own pilot pipelines. Whether you came through the Da Bi Gai route or as a Yang Cheng Sheng, you had to sign an extremely long labor contract with the airline. How long? I asked one pilot, and he told me, 99 years. That means, at least on paper, the airline has you under contract for essentially your whole life. Only after serving for 99 years can you technically be free. Because of this, pilots in China are locked into a very rigid relationship with their airline. It's extremely hard to leave. If a pilot wants to quit and go fly abroad, they would need their Chinese airline to certify their hours and credentials. But most airlines refuse to do that. So in reality, Chinese commercial pilots have no real freedom. They're stuck with the airline that trained them. Another issue is that back in 2008 and 2009, when the airline industry was booming, companies were recruiting pilots aggressively. Business was great. But in recent years, the industry hasn't been doing well. If you look at the big three, Air China, China Eastern, and China Southern, they've all been reporting financial losses. A lot of private airlines are also struggling. So now, most airlines are looking to cut costs and improve efficiency. But here's the thing. It's really hard to save money in aviation. Running a flight includes several major expenses. First, most planes used by Chinese airlines are leased, so there's a constant leasing cost. Second, there are route fees. Third, airport takeoff and landing fees. Fourth, fuel costs. All of these are fixed, non-negotiable expenses. Then finally, the fifth category, personnel costs. Compared to the rest, this is the smallest, usually only 5 to 10% of total operating costs. But it's the only category airlines can actually reduce. You can't cut leasing costs or fuel prices, but you can cut salaries. So naturally, airlines started focusing on cutting personnel expenses. And within that category, the group they target the most is pilots, especially captains. Cabin crew salaries are already low, just a few thousand to maybe 10,000 yuan a month. Many flight attendants now rely on in-flight sales just to earn extra income. There's not much left to cut there. But captains, especially full captains, make a lot more. A typical full command captain in China earns somewhere between 1 to 2 million yuan per year. Within the captain rank, there are several levels. First, you start as a responsible captain. Above that are instructors, what we call Jiao Yuan in Chinese. Instructors are also ranked Level 1, Level 2, and Level 3. A Level 3 instructor is the highest. These are the ones allowed to train new pilots during base airport practice, doing repeated takeoffs and landings. That's called flying the base. Instructors can sit next to new co-pilots or trainees and monitor their operations in real time. They guide them, correct them, and decide whether they're ready to progress. That's what instructors do. Above the instructor rank, there's one more level, the Chief Flight Officer. Each airline only has one. Depending on your rank, captains in China generally earn between 1 to 2 million yuan a year. Co-pilots, on the other hand, usually earn between 200,000 to 500,000. That's a huge difference. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Even if you've earned your captain qualification, it doesn't mean the airline has to let you fly as one. Whether you actually get assigned captain duties depends on the company's overall financial situation and route needs. So what are some airlines doing now? They're using something called flight inspections as a way to control costs. Let's say you've just been promoted to captain. The airline schedules a flight inspection. If the inspector finds issues, no matter how small, they can use that to demote you. Suddenly, you're no longer a full captain. Maybe they drop you to cruise captain, or worse, back to co-pilot. And remember, going from captain to co-pilot means your salary drops from maybe 1.2 million a year to just 300,000. That's a huge cost saving for the airline. Several pilots I spoke to believe that's exactly what happened to Li Yuzhong. They think Southern Airlines targeted him on purpose, using the inspection process as a tool to cut costs. And pilots know this game well. They say even if you fly perfectly, if someone wants to find fault during an inspection, they will. Inspectors have broad discretion, and there's always something they can pick at. On top of that, every 6 months, pilots are required to go through simulator retraining. Like I mentioned earlier, China's simulator tests are among the toughest in the world. pilots get nervous just hearing the words simulator check. Why? Because the simulator throws multiple emergencies at you at once. You might be flying solo, then lose an engine, then face instrument failure, all stacked together. You have to respond to all of it, while the inspector watches your every move. And that inspector, they have the power to make or break your career. Not long ago, there was another serious incident at Southern Airlines. After finishing a simulator test, one pilot felt the inspector had been unfair, deliberately giving him a failing score by nitpicking everything. The pilot was so angry and frustrated that he stabbed the inspector. That really happened. So you can see, the recent suicide by a pilot wasn't even the first time something like this has happened at that airline. Pilots told me that this so-called efficiency drive has gotten completely out of hand. They said airlines are now saving money in ridiculous ways. One example, some pilots were asked to wash the plane after landing, literally hosing it down. Normally, this kind of job should be done by a specialized cleaning crew. But now, some airlines make pilots clean the aircraft after duty and offer them a small overtime bonus. But many captains refuse. For them, being a pilot is a profession they take pride in. To step down from the cockpit and go wash the plane, that's humiliating. And it's not just that. Many pilots are also being told to show up for desk duty when they're not flying. They're asked to do clerical work, like printing, copying, running office errands. All of this is part of the airline's cost cutting. But even if pilots are unhappy, most can't leave. They're trapped. That 99-year contract still hangs over them like a weight they can't shake off. So under all this pressure, how could pilots not have mental health issues? How could captains not feel frustrated or humiliated? This really shows some deep-rooted problems inside China's airline management system. And that's not even all of it. Many pilots mentioned another thing, the rise of second-generation pilots, meaning the sons and daughters of airline or aviation bureau officials. Now, if the rules were strict and applied fairly to everyone, most pilots would accept it. That's just competition. But the reality is, if your father is an airline executive or a senior official in the Civil Aviation Administration, the standards are suddenly a lot more flexible. You make mistakes? No problem, you still get promoted quickly. From co-pilot to captain in no time. But if you don't have any connections, that same promotion might take you years. No matter how well you perform, it's much harder to move up. And it's not just about promotions. Even the flight routes are divided unfairly. Some routes are considered good major cities like Shanghai Pudong, or special airports like Linji in Tibet. These flights count double. Flying 1 hour is credited as 2. But those good routes, they always go to people with connections. The second-generation pilots, the friends of management. If you're an ordinary pilot, you're stuck with bad routes, remote areas, overnight flights, low bonuses. And when the company's financials aren't looking good, they can just run a flight inspection on you, find some small mistake, and demote you from captain to cruise captain, or even back to co-pilot. After hearing all of this from the pilots I interviewed, I had a strong feeling. The airline industry in China has become completely involuted. This kind of internal competition, this squeezing and pushing, is happening in many industries across the country, but it's especially intense in aviation. And in my opinion, this level of internal pressure is harmful. Honestly, if China has more pilots than it needs, it should encourage them to go abroad, to compete globally. Let Chinese pilots go work with foreign airlines, fly international routes, bring their skills to a bigger stage. That would be healthy competition. But now, we're closing the doors and competing with ourselves. That only leads to more pressure and more mental burnout. In the long run, it's terrible for the future of aviation in China. Because let's face it, flight safety isn't achieved just by stacking on rules and regulations. It's not something you can guarantee by making the system stricter and stricter. At the end of the day, safety depends on people. It's the pilot in the cockpit. If that person is under too much pressure, if they've lost trust in the system, if they feel ignored or disrespected, then no safety rule in the world can protect the flight. Like the saying goes, a storm starts with a breeze. One falling leaf can signal the change of season. That's why I think the real crisis in China's airline industry isn't technical. It's psychological. The system doesn't treat regular captains or co-pilots as people who deserve respect. And that is dangerous. I heard about one pilot who left China and went to the US to work during the pandemic. It wasn't easy. He had to go through a lot to get there. Chinese airlines don't usually help pilots transfer their certifications overseas, so he had to get a brand new license in the US, but he made it. He now flies for an American airline.
有没有一些你觉得国内航司做的比较好的，美国的这边航司比较欠缺的点？
我觉得就是你比如说他在训练上头要求严格是对旅客的负责，但是对于飞行员的话，它是一种太过了，就太过了。
OK
我愿意把它飞好，我愿意精益求精，但是你不能逼着我去做这个事情，毕竟大家只要能保证安全就够。
你的意思是国内这个是这个有点过了，还是说美国有点过了？
我觉得国内这个是有点过了，然后就是美国的话，它有些公司有点不太够，就是
有点不太够，有点欠缺。如果能水平一下、中和一下就更好。
也不是我不觉得它是欠缺，就是说有些人还是需要，就是美国这边有些人他是需要对自己要求严格一点。
有些相当于说有些美国的年轻的可能飞行员，可能现在确实有一些水，然后呢，可能需要确实是需要对自己再严格一点啊。
That's why safety is never a small matter. I truly hope that everyone working in this industry can be treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. I hope they can earn a living, yes, but also earn respect. I hope they can find meaning in their work, while also gaining recognition and understanding from the broader public. Only under those conditions can we, as ordinary passengers, sit on a plane and feel at ease, truly trust that our lives are in good hands. Because at the end of the day, we are placing our safety in the hands of the captain, the one person who holds ultimate control over everything that happens in the air. That's all I wanted to share today. Thank you.
你觉得在中国和在美国当飞行员最大的不同是什么？
我觉得还是工作环境的一个问题，文化差异你基本感觉不到。
那边可能副驾驶也是一个职业，就是副驾驶跟机长之间相对来说比较平等一点啊，大家都是出来干活挣钱的，大家踏踏实实把航班运行保证安全完了以后各回各家，对吧？差不多也是这么意思。
对，就包括机长、飞行员跟乘务员，就是机长跟乘务员也都没什么这种的，大家都是出来干活的，没有什么这种，
就没有见过那种端着的机长出去必须要指导一圈工作，然后把这个屌一顿，那个屌一顿，这个骂一下，那个骂一下，可能在美国是不可能有这种人出现的。这种人的话，可能基本上在公司也混不下去
啊。对，因为你可以有个 no fly list，
你可以选啊，到最后这个人就
再也混不了，
这个
人就没人跟他飞了。
这个还挺好的，黑名单呗，相当于一个飞行员之间的黑名单嘛。
大家好，我叫李波，现就职于中国南方航空公司飞行总队，司职飞行员。
我是一名合格的机长，工作16年来没有出过任何安全和纪律上的违规。在帮我主持正义的领导调离南航之后，因为我前面抵制了娱乐行为和实名举报了下级领导向我的索贿行为，我遇到了极其特殊的对待。我能做的就是按照组织程序，拿出具体证据，反映实际情况。
实际用了20天完成第一次检查，严重违反技术管理手册。我当时看了第一感觉，本来是觉得前面写的正常，后面写的不通过，并且最后一段字的笔记，我感觉是明显的不符。并且时隔近4个月才通知我去签字确认结果，我当时真不理解这个里面是图什么，为什么？正常其实应该不通过，签完本，知道问题，针对问题进行代飞，还有第2次机会。但在这4个月内，他没有告诉我具体问题。